Stitching in the ditch just refers to stitching along the seam between two fabrics. And I know as soon as I said that, half of you all were like, no way, no, I don't want to stitch in the ditch. Even if you don't love anybody enough to do this on their quilt, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to show you how to do it. It's still a great practical application, and it will help you learn how to maneuver around the quilt. That doesn't mean that you have to absolutely do it on anybody's quilt. Now, I am using the class quilt for this section. I'm going to show you how to work on here. So if you want to make it as well, there's a free pattern in the class materials. Or if you're like, heck no, get me right to the quilting, just slap some fabric and batting together, and then you can practice along with me as well. So stitching in the ditch, not only do you have to stitch along the seam, you're trying to make it look hidden. The best kind of stitching in the ditch is stuff that you don't notice. I like to joke that it's like waxing your eyebrows. Not because it's painful, but because it makes your whole face look better and nobody notices. It's not like anybody ever came up to me and was like, your stitching in the ditch is amazing. But the main idea is I'm using stitching in the ditch to stabilize my quilt. So let's say I want to hold it all together, get all the seams stitched in, then I can take out these safety pins and get right to the quilting. Or I prefer to use it as a way to move in between design to design, and it allows me to be more efficient with my quilting. So let's pretend I want to quilt along this seam right here. If your seam has been pressed to one side, you'll have a higher and a lower side. So kind of aim for the lower side. And I'm using a nice bright blue so that you can see what I'm doing. But just know that if I were actually doing this on a quilt, I would be using matching thread because matching thread color covers a multitude of quilting sins. So we're going to pretend I want to quilt along this seam. I'm going to position my ruler along my foot. I'm going to start with the needle in the seam and then position the ruler. And I'm going to look to see how it's tracking. So if my ruler is off to the side like this, I know what's going to happen, right? I'm going to be veering off that seam. So I'm kind of looking along the ruler and making sure that spacing is nice and consistent. But I'm actually thinking in little tiny increments. So as I start to move, moving along that seam, I'm going to do a little bit, maybe an inch or two, and then I'm going to stop and make sure my ruler is still going the right direction. Because here's the thing about seams, they're not always a perfectly straight line, especially if I'm the one piecing it. So I'm going to take my time, and I really want to follow that seam, especially if it isn't perfectly straight. Once I get to my fingertips or I get to a place where I want to, I can reposition my whole ruler, just sliding it down. So if my hand was up here and I know I'm heading along, I could keep going, or I could just kind of reposition as I go. And sometimes I do a little bit of both, and then continuing on. Now, when your face is 2 inches from the quilt, it's going to be easy to see any bobble, any not perfect quilting. But just know, as I come back and fill in around all that with more quilting, it's going to kind of disappear. So try not to judge it too much right now. Don't worry about it. Just keep moving your way along that seam. Now, it may seem a little advanced. Some of you newer quilters might be like, I'm not ready for that. Actually, this is one of the easier things to do with the ruler because you have the line. You just have to follow the line that you have. So you might find that this might be a great place to start with your rulers. Now, once I hit a corner, like I'm getting ready to do, I have a decision to make. I can either turn my ruler and quilt horizontally, and that's probably what I will do. Or if it's a really long seam and I know it doesn't feel comfortable, I can rotate the whole quilt so that I'm working vertical. The whole idea is to work within whatever feels comfortable for you because you're the one that has to work over the whole quilt.